Welcome in, Slumpbusters. As part of our continued NBA coverage today, we are talking everything Charlotte Hornets. Your host, Juju Talk Sports, joined, of course, by Kyle Ledbetter, and our guest today, joining us from across the pond, James Plowright of at the Hive Live. James, for someone that's, based out there in England, how does one end up following the Charlotte Hornets? How does that story come to be?
Yeah, a little bit by luck. I'm not going to lie. One of my good friends played basketball in school, and he actually went to college D3 in America. And he wrote me into joining the school team. And everyone had a jersey, right? Everyone had a jersey. I didn't have one. So when I went to America, I've got family in Alabama. I went to America and I went to a Reebok store, and there were two jerseys: a Cleveland Cavaliers LeBron James jersey and an Adam Morrison Charlotte Bobcats jersey, which is the one that is hung up on the wall behind me for those watching. And look, I knew who LeBron was, and I was like, oh, that's boring. Let's go for this Adam Morrison guy and this team I've never heard of. And from there, it was a small decision which snowballed. For Adam Morrison to be the guy who got me into the Charlotte Bobcats is some weird sense of torture. But yeah, that's how I went from there back in probably 2007, 2008. And that's how I started me on my Charlotte journey.
Well, on the bright side, no one is ever going to accuse you of being a bandwagon jumper because you jumped on them when they were the Bobcats. And now you seem to be catching them at a bit of a good time, a bit of an upswing for the franchise. Obviously, LaMelo Ball's in tow, and he's looking fantastic. In fact, he's looking so good that NBA legend Magic Johnson put his praise on him this past weekend or during the NBA All-Star break. It's not the first time that Magic has put his praise behind a Ball brother. Obviously, he said Lonzo was going to be hanging jerseys out there in Staples, and now he's calling Melo a gym rat, reminds him a lot of himself. What kind of weight do you put in Magic's comments, especially because of the misevaluation of Lonzo earlier?
I think Magic's comments by themselves, I don't put much weight on at all. But what he said echoes generally what you hear a lot about LaMelo Ball, which is actually quite different to the preconception I think a lot of people had when he came into the league. Everyone thought he was going to be this reality star, drama, and actually, there was a really good podcast with Cody Zeller when he went on the Watch Pod over the offseason. And LaMelo Ball was chatting to Cody in the training room being like, I wish we could get rid of social media. I absolutely hate it. He just wants to play basketball all the time, Rising Stars, NBA All-Star game. He's out there picking up 4 fouls in the NBA All-Star game because he's just into the game so much. So he is a gym rat. He worked out a lot in Charlotte this offseason, which again, I think a lot of people would presume, well, LaMelo's not going to stay in Charlotte. He stayed in his apartment working out. And that's where he's happiest. So what Magic said really echoed what a lot of people around the team know LaMelo to be.
So for most of the season this year, Miles Bridges was the leading scorer for the Charlotte Hornets, even though we all know that LaMelo Ball is the bona fide star on the team. He just contributes in other ways than scoring. So I ask you, why should people be caring more about Miles Bridges as the second, third, or fourth best player on this weird Charlotte Hornets team that has been constructed here?
I think Miles Bridges is someone who's great for both the casual and the hardcore fan, because if you just want to watch a game with a guy who can throw down crazy dunks, Miles Bridges will do that. He's absolutely probably a top 5 dunker, in-game dunker in the NBA. Alley-oops on the fast break. He just absolutely killed Clint Capella last season, which is probably one of my top dunks for the Hornets ever. But then on the other side, he's a really interesting player. He's a kind of 6'6", really powerful power forward. Even though he's left-handed, he does everything with his right hand at the rim. So he shoots left-handed, but he always finishes spinning to his right with his right hand, which is always kind of a funky one. And you always hear the opposing team's announcers be like, oh, and that was with his right hand. And you're like, yes, you obviously don't watch him because he does that every single time. But no, he's a really interesting player. This season his shooting's taken a real dip, which is a shame. But last year he was, I think, 5 or 6 made free throws from being a 50, 40, 90 guy, which is, really underrated. And he's just taking a big jump for this team. He's got great vision, good passing, his great chemistry with LaMelo Ball, both on and off the court. They're really close. And obviously with his athleticism and LaMelo's ball vision, they're a really dynamic pairing, especially in transition offense. So there really isn't anything Miles can't do. He can shoot. He's not shooting great this year, but he's an okay shooter. He can score inside. The only thing he probably needs to work on is self creation in that mid range a little bit. If he's not at the rim and not taking threes, he sometimes struggles. So yeah, that's pretty much the most important thing from a Miles Bridges point of view.
the Hornets are obviously such a unique franchise. If for nothing else, the man at the top, the man, the myth, the legend, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. Not a lot of organizations have a legend at the top of their pyramid. Certainly not a lot of them have the greatest of all time of their respective sport. Do you think there's added expectation, added pressure when you have MJ leading this franchise?
Pressure is an interesting word. I don't know if I would use that. I just would say, like, all you've heard the players talk about since whenever as MJ's been GM to owner is when MJ's in the gym or sitting on the bench during games, like, people's levels just go up. There's a little bit less chat. There's a little bit less chatting off the court. People just zone in and focus a little bit more. He's quite distant. He's not like a really medley owner. I know the media likes to kind of project in that way, especially after his time being GM for the Wizards and the Bobcats and some of the struggles he had there. But he's not kind of in and around every day. But I think the main thing is, like I said, he runs the level up. I know in the summer, the offseason before last, like PJ Washington and Miles Bridges went to his house in Florida and worked out for like a week or two. And that was just because MJ invited them. So there's not many owners in the NBA who can be like, hey, come and work out at my house and I'll give you some tips. There's probably like the only guy in the league right now who could do that. So yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, the other thing I will say, the Charlotte Hornets actually do relatively okay in free agency. If you think they've had Gordon Hayward, they've had Al Jefferson come there in free agency, Terry Rozier, if you want to count that. I know it wasn't the start at the time, but for a really small franchise who's not had any success at all over the last 10, 15 years, like you look at OKC, I think the best free agent they've ever signed was like Patrick Patterson or Anthony Morrow. So Charlotte do okay. And I think, MJ is a big part of that. And Gordon Hayward said that when he came to Charlotte, and he actually signed it twice because he signed as a restricted free agent back when he was in the Jazz and ended up matching. I think he does have an effect from a free agency point of view, bringing people in as well.
So you mentioned Terry Rozier a second ago, and I wanted to talk about him because I've found him to be incredibly fascinating over the past 3 years, where he goes from being scary Terry during the one playoff run for the Celtics, but he only averaged like 20 minutes a game. And now that he's playing for the Hornets, he's averaged like 35, 35, 34. He's started every game pretty much for 3 straight seasons now. So as more of an expanded role on the Hornets, how has Terry Rozier kind of meshed into this next step of his career where he's a 20-point a game scorer? People don't think of him as a perennial top 50 player or even the second best player on a team, but he's been incredibly productive and remarkably healthy for the Hornets over the last 3 years.
Look, when he was signed, he was the Kemba replacement, right? And at the time, everyone was laughing at the contract, $80 million a year for Terry Rozier. He's never had a true shooting percentage above 45% and all these things. He's more than lived up to that contract. It was good. I will say that way he's meshed with the team is completely different to how I think the team thought he was going to mesh. They brought him in to be their point guard. And after like 10 games of his first season, before LaMelo was even around in Charlotte, Devontae Graham had usurped him as the lead ball handler. And Terry kind of moved to a off-ball role where he essentially just kind of got pretty aggressive from three and essentially transitioned to being one of the best kind of catch and shoot shooters in the NBA. Like his stats over the past 3 seasons have been right up there. So he was supposed to be the Kemba replacement, and he kind of just shifted over. Now, LaMelo being 6'8", I mean, Terry's only, I think, 6'2", something. He's not the biggest, but he has got a really big wingspan. Defensively, he really struggles. Like, the Charlotte Hornets are not a good defensive team. Terry Rozier has kind of great defensive moments, but overall, he really struggles on that end, and LaMelo isn't the best either, so that's one of the big contributions to the poor defense in the backcourt there. But offensively, completely, he's played probably more point guard this year than the last couple of years because he's kind of staggered. Borrego's staggered LaMelo and Rozier a bit more and given Rozier some more ball handling opportunities. And when he's had them, he's actually done okay. So look, the extension which they gave him at the start of the season for another 4 years, he was probably going to be like the best free agent on the market this offseason. I think he would have got that money to go elsewhere. I think they wanted to tap him up. And I think, he's probably the veteran leader for this team. Over the summer, he actually arranged like a training camp in Miami, got all the players down. Every single roster player was there. And, you know, he's the guy kind of leading those kind of things. So he's a big part of this team. He's had a little bit of a down year. He had a really tough start to the year with COVID and a foot sprain. And he's kind of not probably been quite as consistent in the years past, but he's still been a good player for this team on the offensive end. But it's just the defensively where it lets him down, and does make you question his long-term fit with LaMelo Ball. Like, will Rozier and LaMelo Ball be a perennial playoff team starting backcourt? To be decided, I think. I don't think anyone knows the answer to that just yet.
In the Charlotte Hornets conversation of best overall player, GM Mitch Kupchak kind of weighed in with his 2 cents, and he made a little bit of noise when he said Gordon Hayward was the Hornets' best player. Gordon's missed some time with an ankle injury. I'm a Celtics fan. I'm familiar with Gordon Hayward missing time. First off, right now, do you agree with Kupchak's comments? And what do you think the Hornets have missed without him on the court?
I don't agree with Kupchak's comments. I don't know why I said that. Like, he's the highest paid player on the team, so maybe it's one of those, you know, keep your guy happy. I think for me, it would be LaMelo Ball is the best player, and I'm not just saying that because LaMelo Ball is popular, and by saying that, people are going to say yay and get lots of clicks. Like, he was the all-star. He got the most votes from the media. Like, he is what makes this team a top 10 offense, which, I mean, they were top 3 for most of the year. They've had a torrential shooting season over the last 15 games or so. They've just really dropped off. But LaMelo Ball still has his hands all over this team. And I think they've given them a real sense of identity. And teams are often game planning with LaMelo Ball being the start of their stat sheet, which is what I think you can really credit. Best player in the team is, what are the other team trying to take away, number one? And LaMelo Ball is normally that. So I think Hayward is probably a really important player for this team. But if you were to open the bidding up for trades right now, irrelevant of contract situation, I think LaMelo's being the most prized guy on the roster.
So big picture for the Charlotte Hornets here. They have a 21-year-old all-star who in his second season is going to take the Hornets to somewhere in the playoffs, probably further than last year where they lose in the initial play-in round. And maybe they get a 7-game series this year. Who knows? But they have a 21-year-old all-star. In his third year, he'll probably take another leap similar to what we saw with Ja Morant or Luka Doncic over the past couple of years. So as the Hornets start to get better year to year, what is the next big picture move for the Hornets? Is it a trade? Is it a signing? Is it just keep the core of Washington and Hayward and Rozier and Bridges and Ball together and see what ends up happening?
I don't think the Hornets are going to make many big splashy moves. Kupchak has been consistent, and he even said this in his press conference after the trade deadline. We are not trying to rush this thing. We are not getting overexcited, carried away right now and being like, yeah, let's trade loads of first round picks for guys who can help us right now. If they wanted to do that, they could have gone and got Rashawn Holmes or Sabonis or some of the guy, you know, traded picks or whatever for the deadline they wanted to do. They are wanting to build through the draft. And I think that's not just like some teams build through the draft and then they hit a point and they go, we are not drafting anymore. We are trading and we are signing free agency. I don't think the Hornets are going to do that. I think they're going to do Spurs style. That's what they're basing this whole project on. That's where Borrego's come from, where even when they are competing, they're still drafting in the late teens, in the 20s and bringing players in and developing them. And you've seen second round picks, Devontae Graham, Jalen McDaniels, Cody Martin, JT Thor. Like, they're all playing minutes for this Charlotte Hornets team right now. And I think Kupchak has done well finding those guys late in the draft. I think Borrego's doing a good job developing them. I think that's going to be the plan. I think they're going to be hesitant to trade future firsts. I know they did this past offseason, but they did it for another rookie in Kai Jones. So it's not like they were trading it for a short-term rental. So I think, what's the big splashy move? I don't know if there will be one. The most obvious thing, right, is the center position. You've got the Mason Plumlee, Nick Richards, Montrezl Harrell kind of merry-go-round right now, which are all kind of like, if you had each one of those guys coming off your bench for like 15 minutes a night, you're probably happy, but you don't really want any of them starting. The obvious one is that, but I don't project them to have loads of cap space anytime soon, other than kind of full mid-level exception money. So I don't see them getting a big upgrade that way. I think their hope is, you know, James Bouknight, JT Thor, Kai Jones, these guys pop, these guys develop, they have a breakout season like Devontae Graham last year, Miles Bridges this year, and that's how this team gets better.
Kyle, the simple answer to that question is they already made the big splashy move. They signed Isaiah Thomas yesterday to a 10-day contract. What is it with you Hornets and getting these former Celtics players, these former Celtics great, Rozier, Hayward, now IT? Is that the move? Is that what's going to lead them to the promised land?
I don't know about that. I mean, Isaiah Thomas has been out there for what, 2 or 3 years now, and the Hornets could have signed him at any point, and they haven't done. Look, I think after the Ish Smith trade at the deadline, they needed more ball handling. We talked about DJ Augustine being an option, Thomas Satoransky being an option. We even thought about Kemba Walker might be an option if he got bought out by the Knicks, which didn't happen, even though he's not playing for them anymore. We never kind of really thought about Isaiah Thomas just because he's been out there for so long. It kind of felt like, well, if they wanted him, they could have got him in the offseason instead of Ish Smith. But I do think his connection to the Celtics guys is going to play part of that. I think they really want his approach and competitiveness to rub off on LaMelo Ball. I think that's a really big thing for him to come in. But look, there's got to be a reason why Isaiah Thomas has played for 5 teams last 3 years and not stuck anywhere. Is that place Charlotte? It wouldn't surprise me if they sign him for the rest of the season. They've got a spare roster spot. They need a backup ball handler. It would make sense if he's willing to come in here and kind of not really kind of demand the playing time, which I don't think he will, playing behind Terry and LaMelo. Yeah, so I don't think it's leading them anywhere, but I think at this point in the season, filling out the back of the roster, sure, why not? It's my approach.
Sure, why not? Tearing up the G League, so hopefully it does bring something to your team. James, again, thank you for dropping by today. Give everyone the obligatory free plugs here. Where can we find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me. I do most of my stuff on Twitter. It's at British_Buzz. And then if you go to the SB Nations site for at the Hive, you'll find some of my writing on there. And then I do kind of a weekly podcast for them as well, which is at the Hive Live, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll have guests on there. We have players, we have coaches, we have a real mix of people coming on and some other NBA personalities as well. So yeah, you can find us on there, and always good to come on and talk about Hornets on a kind of a national NBA news covering pod, because it's not something that really gets touched on very often. So thank you guys for taking the time to listen about our little team in North Carolina.
Happy to do it, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it a lot more for a lot more years to come because of this recent buzz that they're creating in Charlotte. But all right, James, wish you the best from Juju Talk Sports. Kyle Ledbetter, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we will see you next time.